So this week is the birthday of the Baal Shem Tov, who founded the Hasidic movement, which many have called the most important movement in the history of Judaism. It certainly had the greatest impact in the modern era, and a lot of what we see today as the flourishing of Yiddishkeit, of Judaism, of Torah, of prayer around the world is thanks to the generations that came after the Baal Shem Tov, that studied his teachings and took it further and further until in our generation, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who basically, one might say, conquered the United States. And the rest of the world is still waiting to a large degree. But in the United States, certainly what has happened is a result of what he did. So it's a result of these ideas that were started by the Baal Shem Tov. So what I'd like to start with tonight is why he was called the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem means a master of a name. And usually a Baal Shem in the history of the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries meant someone who was a master of a Kabbalistic name. He knew a certain name and he used to perform miracles with it in some way. He was called the master of the good name. Baal Shem Tov, Tov means good. So what name is good? Well, it doesn't mean that there's names that are not good. Obviously all the names are good. So specifically the meaning is that he was the master of the name that equals good. There's a specific name in Kabbalah that is, its value, its gematria is 17, good. What is that name? So that name comes from the first verse of the Torah. The first verse says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And these words, the heavens and the earth in Hebrew are et ha-shamayim ve'et ha'aretz. And when you write the initials of these four words, they're Aleph, Hey, Vav, Hey. Et ha-shamayim ve'et ha'aretz. And so Aleph and Hey are 7. Sorry, Aleph and Hey are not 7. Aleph and Hey are 6. I'm still tired. And Vav and Hey are 11. So together that makes 17. So he was the master of this name, Aleph, Hey, Vav, Hey. What kind of a name is Aleph, Hey, Vav, Hey? Nobody ever heard about that. So many of the Kabbalistic names nobody ever heard of because we don't study Kabbalah so much. But this name in particular has a very special meaning that is not so hard to understand. What does it mean, the heavens and the earth? The way that this was explained is that this name joins the spiritual with the mundane. That there should be a connection between the spiritual and the mundane. How does life work? That before we come into this world, we're just a soul. And the soul is only spiritual. And when we come into this world, we become almost entirely physical. Even what we call spirituality is not really spirituality. It's more the spirituality of the mundane. It's not the spiritual. Nobody remembers and nobody sees. None of us can see. Maybe somebody here can, but I can't. Can't see godliness. We don't see the underlying unity of all of reality. We can't see it. We can talk about it. We can say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad from now till the end of eternity, but it doesn't cause us to see this unity, that God is one. So in a sense, once the soul comes down and is embodied in a physical form, so we lose sight of the spiritual. So we talk about it a lot, we try to do all kinds of rituals that are connected to it, but in the end we have to admit that we don't see it. So came the Baal Shem Tov and said, there's a name, a holy name, Aleph, Hey, Vav, Hey, Et ha-shamayim ve'et ha'aretz, the heavens and the earth. And this name has a special ability to connect the spiritual with the mundane. What would that mean? It would mean that in spite of the fact that we're in a bodily form and that we're limited in our ability to see the spiritual, we would still have an understanding of the spiritual that would normally not be possible. That's the idea behind the Baal Shem Tov. So everything that the Baal Shem Tov did was in a way to reveal the spiritual within the physical. And also, in some ways, to reveal the physical within the spiritual. That's a bigger trick sometimes. And that's why it was called the Baal Shem Tov, the good name. How do you do this? How does this name work? So the Baal Shem Tov knew that there were some people like him that were unique, not many. The Talmud says that these people are called tzaddikim. And the tzaddik, he sees the world differently than a regular person does. His eyes are not completely shut the way that our eyes are. And so, said the Baal Shem Tov, in his time, the tzaddikim that existed, because they saw the world differently, they didn't want to live with regular people in the cities or in towns. So they went to live in the forests. And they secluded themselves. They were like hermits. And they actually they already had a union back then of the tzaddikim. And they were in a group together. They called them the tzaddikim anistarim, the hidden tzaddikim. And they supported each other in their learning and in their search for the spiritual. When he was 18, the Baal Shem Tov was appointed to be the head of the hidden tzaddikim. And so one of the first things that he enacted, the first decisions, was that the tzaddikim would go around and ask people how they are. How are you doing? It's funny, people didn't ask each other, how are you doing? When they saw each other, they didn't say, so how's it going? But apparently, even if regular people did this, the tzaddikim didn't do this so much, because they were hermits. They were away from society. So he did this by stages, it's a salami system. Slowly he moved them. So the first thing he said is that you have to walk around to where people live, and you have to start conversations with them and ask them how they are. And what are they going to answer? Whatever they answer, you teach them to answer, thank God. Everything is good. Why? He darshaned on this, he explained on this, the verse, Yoshev Tehilot Yisrael, that God sits upon the praises of the Jewish people. What does it mean? That before then it was not common that when you ask someone, how are you doing, that they would answer, thank God. This was, even the non-Jews for sure didn't know about this. This spread from us slowly into the entire world, but it started from the Baal Shem Tov, this change, that when you ask someone, how are you doing, they don't say fine, they don't say okay, they don't say this and say that, they say thank God, Baruch Hashem. And this Baruch Hashem, he said, this is what God rests on. This is what gives him a place in the world. The people begin to acknowledge that there's godliness here. And even if I don't see it, but I acknowledge it, I begin to develop a consciousness that there is godliness in the world. And it comes from simple things. The first simple thing is, how are you in the morning? I'm, Baruch Hashem, good. That simple idea that you answer that way begins to change the consciousness, begins to open us up to seeing something, or at least recognizing that there is something that is beyond just the mundane world. So that was the first thing he did. After that, once he had their attention, the tzaddikim, he did another drush, another interpretation. And he said like this, that until now, the tzaddikim have been sitting in the forests. Now I want them to move and to live in the cities. So what did he say? It's a small change. It's not a really big change. You fooled them, right? Because they didn't know. He said, how do you say forest in Hebrew? Yar. Yud Ayin Reish. How do you say city in Hebrew? Ir. Ayin Yud Reish. So he says it's just a permutation. You'll be just as fine in the city as you are in the forest. And he got them to move from their hermetic type of lifestyle to live in the cities. And that was the beginning of the Hasidic movement, that there began to be rebbes, tzaddikim, who lived in concentrations where Jewish people were concentrated, and they began to give advice to these people, to these simple people, about how to live their lives. And again, they didn't come to preach, they didn't come to tell people how to live, they came to give advice. That when you came to him, if you liked him, if you liked the advice, he came again. If you didn't like the advice, he didn't come again. But it was that simple. Because he has spiritual vision, because he sees something beyond what we normally see, so usually this advice was really good. And it really helped people. So this began to create a relationship between the heavens and the earth, between those people who still have an inkling of what the spiritual looks like and how it acts, and the people, most of us, who don't have that. The Baal Shem Tov knew that the ultimate connection between the heavens and the earth depends on consciousness. Meaning, if your eyes are open, you don't need consciousness, you see it anyway. But if your eyes are not open, like us, and you live in a mundane world, and you only see the physical, so the way to describe this would be like someone who works in a nuclear plant. He's a nuclear engineer, or he's a technician there. And he's sitting in the command room, and he knows that sometimes he has to go around the nuclear plant. But he's very, very careful. How is he careful? Because every door has a seal, and every place has a certain amount of radiation in it, and you can't stay too long in one place. And there's certain places that you can't enter at all, unless certain precautions are taken, and so on and so forth. What's the problem? Why is it so dangerous, the whole thing? That you can't see the radiation. If you could see the radiation, there wouldn't be a problem. If radiation was like light, like water, you could protect yourself. But when you can't see it, and you can't even feel it, then you have to take a leap of faith that it's there and to act accordingly. So that means that you've changed your consciousness even though you don't see what it is that you're taking precautions from, but your consciousness can understand that. And so the Baal Shem Tov, he wanted people's consciousness to change. In fact, this name, Aleph Hey Vav Hey, the name that's equal to 17 and for which he was called the Baal Shem Tov, this name in Kabbalah is related to the Sphira called Da'at. And Da'at, one of the simple translations of this word, means consciousness. So this ability to connect the heavens and the earth is like to feel in our mind that the heaven is here, but in spite of the fact that we can't see it. But to act as if it is. Now, Jews have been acting this way, strangely, for many, many thousands of years. Okay? Why? Because one time we stood at Mount Sinai and we saw the heavens open, whatever that means, but it means that we had a vision, or at least heard in some way, or saw sounds in some way, of what it means to prophesize, what it means to be someone who's aware of the spiritual world. And from then on, we've lived that way. We have a memory of this. But the Baal Shem Tov wanted it to be more than a memory, because he said, if it's only going to be a memory, then it doesn't affect you on a daily basis. It only affects you when you come to shul. Okay, so I believe something, but I don't have a consciousness all day long that everything here is godly, that everything that I'm encountering in my life is godly. You won't have that consciousness. To get to that consciousness, you have to take a step up. And the step up has to be that we have to learn certain things that will allow us to change the way we look at the world, at least like a technician in a nuclear plant. At least at that level. But the truth is that after you live like this for a while, you do begin to become sensitive to things that you weren't sensitive before. Now, the Baal Shem Tov didn't write anything. We don't know of any writings of his. He taught and he taught. He taught his disciples how to do this and what to teach people and so on. But he didn't write anything himself except for one thing. He wrote a letter. We have one letter from him. And this letter he wrote to his brother-in-law, whose name was Gershon of Kitov, who, on his request, he had gone to the land of Israel, and we're talking about the very early 18th century. So we're talking about the 1720s, 1730s. And when he went there, he sent him a letter. And in this letter, he described one of the times that his soul departed his body, what today people might call maybe a near-death experience, but it's not exactly the same thing because he didn't go through any trauma. It was just an ability to take the soul out of the body and see beyond. And he described what he saw above. And he describes that he met the Mashiach, and he asked him, when is the Mashiach coming, and so on. And I think most people are familiar with this, at least part of this letter. What most people are not familiar with is the end of the letter. Because the end of the letter is very difficult to understand. At the end of the letter, he writes that after I met the Mashiach's soul and asked him, when are you coming down, and so on, when will the redemption be, when will all this change? He says he was revealed a secret way of bringing people to quickly and easily seeing the spiritual world. He says it was revealed to him how to do this. Except that on his way back down, he was told that he's forbidden from revealing it to other people. So he had this gem, but he couldn't reveal it. So you know a Jew can't, it doesn't work. So he had to find a way around it. And he says, I found a way around it. So I can't reveal exactly what they told me, but I can tell you something similar. And it's similar enough that if you do this, your eyes will be opened. That's what he says. Eventually you'll be able to see and do what I can do. The same miracles, the same special things that I could do, everybody can do. And then he teaches in this letter what this idea is. Now, to understand this idea is very, very difficult. We're not going to have enough time tonight to go over all of it. But we'll go over a main thing that everybody can take away and use. And now, we're going to shift aside for a second and go to the title of this talk, which is that you're not a star, you're a galaxy. What in the world does that mean? So I thought that most people today, they want to give people a sense of worth, a sense of value, and so on. So you're a star. I teach at a girls' seminary in Yerushalayim, and one of the teachers said there at the opening meeting of the teachers, the staff, she was discussing someone, and she said, "Oh, she's a rock star." So I like that idea that it's a rock star. But if you're just a star, that's limited. So I wanted you to feel that you're a galaxy. But there's an idea behind it. That each one of us is much, much more than just a star. Let me explain why I'm saying all this. If we go back just 500 years ago, and we would ask, so what is the universe made out of? What's in the universe? So someone would tell us, we're talking about before Galileo, 500 years ago. He would say, well, we know that there's the Earth, and there's planets, and there's stars. How many stars? About 3,000. That's what the naked eye can see. So we would say the universe is composed of 7 major bodies that we can see, planets, the Earth, and 3,000 stars. If you would have asked someone, a doctor, 500 years ago, what is the human body composed of? What is it made out of? So they would tell you, well, there's organs, And if you follow, like for instance, our sages, so they say there's 248 organs and 365 conduits. These conduits could be nerves, they could be blood vessels, they could be I never know how to say this word in English, so somebody's going to help me. I don't think is how you say it.
Lymphatics.
What?
Lymphatics.
No, sinews, but that's how you say it? Okay. So, altogether, how many? 613 parts. That's all they had. If you ask someone today, how many parts to the human body? So what's the number now?
3 billion nucleotide base pairs.
So that's just the DNA, but how many parts to the body? So let's say we count cells. How many cells? So they talk about now 30 trillion. Yeah. I think it's 3 trillion cells plus all the stuff that runs around, which is in cellular form, which might be smaller cells and so on. Talking about 30 trillion parts, moving parts, most of them. You go to the universe. What happened to the universe? Pretty much the same thing. Those 3,000 stars, you remember them. So it turned out that most of them were actually galaxies. And then, the bigger the telescope that goes out, the more parts you find. So now we're talking about, now at least that's what they're assuming, 200 billion galaxies, and each galaxy has 100 billion stars. So that's a lot. So what happened? What's going on? Is the picture that they had 500 years ago incorrect? It wasn't incorrect for their time. That's what there was. And that's how they lived. The picture that we have today is an inflation of knowledge. That we have tools that allow us to break things apart. And there's something amazing that we find. That no matter how many times we break something apart, we find that we can do it again. Why is that? What is that idea? That idea is that God is infinite. That no matter how much you try to take it apart, you find that it's infinitely deep. It's like the Torah also. Every verse that you take in the Torah, you can learn it one way, a second way, a third way, and the more you take it apart, the more ways, the more information you find. And it just goes on and on and on.
Is it
Say that in
aphorism in Persian that many people here might be familiar with? It's
That's exactly what I wanted to say.
I love that.
Thank you.
Exactly what he
Yeah,
said.
I don't know what it
Find them,
is.
the more you find
The more
out.
you
Yeah.
go,
The more
there's
you-
more
exactly.
infinite.
Exactly. Very nice. I love that.
Do we really need to know about 30 trillion cells? Do we really need to know about trillions and trillions of stars that who knows how many planets they have? Does it really matter to the human being if it's this number or that number? So that's a big question. But what is certain is that if we continue to try to discover, we'll discover that it's even more complex than that. Because we know that each one of these cells is made out of many organelles, many little pieces. And if you just talk about how many molecules are in a human body, so I wanted for a second to do a comparison. If I would look at each one of us as a collection of cells, 30 trillion cells, about the number of stars, let's say, in 1/10,000,000th of the universe. If I would look at each one of us as just a collection of these cells, would I be able to describe anyone in this room? Would any of us feel that we've been properly assessed and properly captured in that description?
There's a lot to learn in it. It's not just like simple things.
But it's not just that it's very complex. There's something missing. The I, what each one of us describes as ourselves, is far beyond and much higher than just a collection of cells. In fact, it's the other way around. That the way we tend to look at it is that we have a body, that I have a body. There's this I, there's this soul that's controlling all of this, or that at least possesses this. Maybe it's not controlling it, but it's possessing this. And the I, the real I, can never be properly described as a collection of these cells. Now let's look at the universe. It's a very strange thing to assume that the universe, which has, again, at least that number of stars, is somehow just a collection of stars. So when we talk about godliness, it's like that higher dimension that is pulling that all together, that possesses all of this, that has all of this. But in the same way that it would strike me as really ludicrous for someone to come and say to me, you're just a collection of cells. I mean, they'd miss me completely. They'd walk straight through me. It's like they never saw me. But you can walk through the entire universe and do the same thing, missing the soul of the universe, which is what we call Hashem, which is what we call God. At least that. By the way, the I that, let's say you would find a way to talk to me right now, just not, right, if I was a doctor, you wouldn't talk to my cells, you would talk to me, right? But the I would be changing all the time, and it could grow over time. So the way that I am just now, that's not a full description of who I am. Over the 70, 80, 90 years of a person's span of life, there's so much more to who they are. And so many different things that come to the foreground and go back to the background. And events that change us and that bring out qualities that we didn't know that we even had. And abilities that we didn't know that we had. And sometimes take them away from us. So this whole dimension that's above the physical is here, it's present, we live it, but it's very hard to put a finger on it. And certainly, the way that you can't capture it is by just looking at the physical. So the same thing is true about the universe. This incredible number of stars is just as, let's call it, personable. It's as alive as the 30 trillion cells inside of me, but you can't find it by looking at the relationship between the stars. You have to go to a different level. Now, I said that 500 years ago, we couldn't bring this type of analysis. I couldn't bring this analogy 500 years ago because 613 parts, it was close to the 3,000. I want you to see that it's the same scale. But I don't know if it would have impressed someone the same way. So the Baal Shem Tov didn't use that example. He used a different example. And he said, and let's read it now. I'm going to skip a few lines just so that we can get the core of this.
This is letter?
This is part of the letter. What I'm going to read now is exactly a quote from the letter. The rest of it is somebody elaborated on the quote from the letter. So we're starting from the sixth line. In every letter, there are worlds, souls, and divinity. And they ascend, they connect, and they unite with one another with divinity. Then the letters unite and connect together, and a word is formed. Then true unifications occur in divinity. And a person should take care to guide his soul through each of these aspects, and then all the worlds are united as one and ascend, and an immeasurable joy and pleasure is created. This is the direct quote from the letter. The rest we'll explain in a moment. What the whole story behind the whole page here is. So the Baal Shem Tov used language to describe the same idea. That if you look at this sheet of paper and you ask, so what is this sheet of paper composed of? What's in it? If you don't understand English, and you would just maybe know the alphabet, so you'd say, okay, I see there's an M and an A and a K and an E, and maybe you'd make like very interesting statistics about how many letters of each type there are and what the frequency is and so on, and what the separation between them is, and all kinds of things. You do all that, and yet still you wouldn't understand what this is saying. You wouldn't understand. Now, the Baal Shem Tov, why did he use this? Because most of the Jews in his time were faced with exactly that problem. They came to synagogue, they came to shul, especially on the high holidays, and there's a lot to say, and they didn't understand what they were saying. So what did they feel? They felt that this is all like some, I don't know, like we're beating on drums. What is this? So they were very sincere and faithful people, so they came every year and they said it. Said the Baal Shem Tov, you should know that if you're able to look at these letters and understand that when they come together, there's something hovering above them, which is not in the letters themselves. No matter how many times you read the letters, you're not going to get that understanding, because it's not in the letters. It's in the letters connecting together. But now I want you to know that there are 3 levels here, he says. There's the letters themselves. Then there are the words that are formed. But the words themselves are only a ladder to a higher reality. And so, if you're only at the stage of the letters, you don't understand the meaning. You don't get the hovering meaning that's above the letters, which forms the words, the sentences, and the meaning of the page. But the truth is that even when you understand that, there's another level above that, which is hovering above the meaning. If you can understand that the letters don't capture the meaning of the words, then you can understand that the words don't yet capture the meaning of what they signify. The words themselves point to a higher reality, which is even higher than the meaning created by the letters coming together to form words. And so he has here 3 levels, and he calls them worlds, souls, and divinity. The worlds are, like we said, they're all the stars, the planets, whatever you have, all the cells in the body. There's nothing there except for a collection of many, many, many objects. And it's okay, that's what it is. And you can study that, and like we said, every certain amount of time you'll discover that there's a lot more objects than you thought. It'll open up and you'll suddenly discover that there were a lot more than you thought there were before. But then there are souls. And the soul is to the body as the meaning of the word is to the letters, as God is to the universe. Again, I don't want to limit God to say that He's just the universe, in the same way that I don't want to limit the soul to just be connected to this one body, because the soul is even greater than that. But it's a way of capturing the idea. But even after you've understood that there's a soul above the body, he says, but there's another level called divinity. And the divinity, how do you get to the divinity? Well, if to get to the souls, what did you have to do? You had to connect the worlds together. To get to the meaning of the words, you had to connect the letters together. So if you want to get to the divinity, you have to connect the souls together. When souls come together, divinity appears. One of the famous sayings that we all know, I think, is that if a man and a woman merit so, that they have a loving relationship, and instead of using love, my late teacher Rabbi Steinsaltz did not like the word love. He said, people love fish. That's what we love. That's what we call love. You don't love your spouse in the same way, right? You don't poach her. We respect, we care, we commit to. Those are the signs of a relationship. We are honest. So when we merit, and the relationship is like that, then the sages say, Rabbi Akiva says, then the divine presence dwells between them. Why between them? Because you need at least two to begin to find the divine. What else? If you have 10, it's automatic, even if they don't respect each other. And we all know that, in shul it's not always, but the divine presence is still there. It just means that it's uncomfortable, but it has to come because there's 10 souls that came together. So every time that you go up a level, there's a new reality, a new dimension that is opened. So you can begin to understand, first of all, why Chassidus, why the movement, the rationale behind the Chassidic movement was love of Israel, was love of your fellow person, your fellow Jew. Because I can't uncover the divine by myself. I just can't. As much as I want to. It says that even if one person is sitting and learning Torah by himself, the divine presence can dwell on him. Why is that true? Because then he's using the Torah, which also has the same 3 levels. The letters, the meaning, and then the divine above it. And if he's learning Torah with that understanding, the divine can appear through the Torah. But if I'm not learning Torah, the only way that the divine can appear is when we're together. This togetherness is the instrument of realizing the divine. So if my eyes are not open, says the Baal Shem Tov, here I taught you a trick. It's like, again, they didn't let me reveal really what I wanted to reveal, he says, but I'm revealing something close to it. So the something that's close to it is that when we're together, then our eyes open to something else. Now, you have to be committed to it. Like, it has to be. It's not something that happens maybe every time that you come to shul. Maybe it doesn't happen every time at a Shabbos table. But it happens. Because the souls, when they come together, they're like a key to opening the higher dimension, in the same way that the words are a key to finding the higher dimension divinity. But so that's just taking those few lines and not really explaining them, but just giving the general idea. But here I took it from something that's called the Pillar of Prayer. The Pillar of Prayer is a long section in a book called Baal Shem Tov and the Torah. And basically they collected all the different sayings of the Baal Shem Tov on prayer. And they called it the Pillar of Prayer. It's a very famous thing about prayer, a famous story from the Baal Shem Tov, which I think many have heard, that he used to pray in length. And this was especially true and problematic, and it looked longer than usual, on Friday afternoon in the Mincha prayer. Because everybody wants to get home. And he would come into the shul, and his disciples were there, and they would start davening, they would start praying. We'll say something about davening in a moment. This word, anybody knows what davening means?
Praying.
Yeah, that's what they say it means, but I'll tell you what it really means in a second. So, he would come in and he would start praying, and it would take him an hour. And everybody was tired already, and they had to get home and help their wives and have to do this and that. And so, one Friday, what can you expect? There's only so much people can sacrifice, even for the Baal Shem Tov. They left, and he stayed there by himself. So he finished davening by himself. They had already finished everything. They went home. And then that night he explained to them what it was like. And he said, you think that nothing happened. So you left me and I finished davening by myself and everything was okay. But I want to tell you what really happened. You don't understand that when 10 of us are together, I'm able to climb to a higher place. And when I'm alone, I can't get there. But what did you do? We started praying together. And I climbed up to where I was. But then I couldn't come back down. And he said, it's like people who have a ladder, and you climb on it, and then they leave with the ladder, and you left me on the tree, and I couldn't get down. That's the dependence that we have on each other. Now, granted that most of us don't feel this, but a tzaddik does feel it. So he has a lot of different things that he writes about prayer. They put all these teachings about prayer, again, he didn't write any of these were just things that were remembered by his disciples. They put all these teachings about prayer in Parshas Noach. Why in Parshas Noach? Why would you put it in Noach? So, the prosaic reason is because it starts, make the ark a lit opening, I'm reading from the page, and terminate it within a cubit above. That's what God commanded Noach to do. And Rabbi Israel Baal Shem explained this verse as follows: make the ark a lit opening. The ark, how do you say ark in Hebrew? Teva, which also means word. A word in Hebrew is either a milah or a teva. Teva means ark. So God commanded Noach to make. Now it's not clear. What did he command him to make? Noach understood that he should make an ark. But the Baal Shem Tov says that's not what God commanded him to do. He commanded him to make a word. A word. What does that mean? What is the Baal Shem Tov saying? He's saying, was Noach a good guy or a bad guy?
He's a good guy.
For his time, yes, he was a good guy.
So why only in his time?
Because when it comes to somebody like Abraham Avinu, he was obviously very low.
So what was the difference? The difference was whether he cared for others. It's a very interesting thing.
Very nice.
Noach was a prophet. He heard what God was saying. He saw, he interpreted. However, he knew what God wanted from him. He was able to save himself and the wildlife. So David Atkinson would have something to talk about. But Atkinson or Attenwood? Attenborough. Thank you. I'd hate to mess up his name. So he saved, but he didn't save humanity. Why did he not save humanity? Because he misunderstood what the prophecy was saying, says the Baal Shem Tov. God was not telling him to make an ark. He was telling him to pray. He was telling him to make words. And he wanted him to bring into those words all of the world. Not just the people, but the wildlife, everything. He wanted him to pray for everything. But Noach didn't understand it that way. He misunderstood the word teva, and he understood that he should make an ark. And how many animals can you fit inside? No, only so many. So says the Baal Shem Tov, it's not only that, I can show you other proofs that he misinterpreted. There's another teaching that he says, if you look at the dimensions of the ark, what were the dimensions? 30 by 50 by 300. What are those three letters? The letter that equals 30 is Lamed. The letter that equals 300 is Shin. And the letter that equals 50 is Nun. What does that spell together? Lashon, tongue. He says, God was giving him the dimensions, not of an ark that he was supposed to build, but of the words that he was supposed to say. He was teaching him how to pray. But he didn't understand this. Why did he not understand this? Not because he was stupid, not because he didn't, because his whole outlook wasn't one of having responsibility and caring for those around him. He was very limited in what kind of a upright person he was. He wasn't upright. He acted differently. His behavior was different. But he wasn't able yet to get to the level of Avraham Avinu, who goes to pray for Sodom and Gomorrah, the most detestable place, abominable place on the face of the planet. And he goes and he prays for them, and he argues with God, and he's now willing to take no for an answer. Eventually he has to, because he doesn't run the world. None of us do. But he has that type of consciousness that I'm here and able to pray for others, to take responsibility for others, to help others. Noach did not have that, so he's an ish tzaddik tamim haya bedorotav. In his generation, he was an upright and righteous person. But if you compare him to the knowledge that came into the world when Avraham came into the world, then he's not such a big righteous individual. He was for his time, he was. But this only the Baal Shem Tov revealed, that the prophecy could have been understood in a different way. So what is he saying? He's saying that prayer is a way to unify, to bring into your prayers everything that you know about. That's what prayer is about. He's saying it's like the ark. It's a place in which you bring things into, Bo'el HaTeva, come into the words. Now we understand it as the words. And when you pray on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and throughout the year, everything that you know should be coming together, because you're the soul that can uncover, that can unlock the higher dimension in everything that you've encountered in life, and you do it during prayer. Let me make this more clear. That what we see normally, we don't have time to reflect. So what we see during the day is a collection of events, a collection of people, stars. We see cells, whatever we see. But when we pray, that's the time to bring all of that into the words. And in the same way that bringing the letters into the words uncovers the meaning, now we're able to uncover not just the meaning, but even bring it all the way up to divinity. And when you do that, it's a very simple thing, he says. You don't have to know anything special. It just means that when you're davening, when you're praying, you should have in mind all the pieces of the puzzle that you've seen. They should come together. Now, you can't really know how they're going to come together when you're praying. You don't know beforehand. It's sort of like making a puzzle, but you don't get to see the box before, so you don't know really what picture is going to come out. But if you do that, you begin to see what the Baal Shem Tov called, we all call it that, but he stressed it, Hashgacha Pratit. You begin to see individual divine providence. You begin to see how your life is really orchestrated and led by the divine. That means that you uncover the divine dimension in your life. I want to explain this a little bit more because this is a very important point. I said before that he was called the Baal Shem Tov because of the name that's equal to 17. And we said that really it's from the first verse of the Torah, Et HaShamayim ve'et ha'aretz. But the Baal Shem Tov was very fond of bringing another source for this name Aleph Hey Vav Hey that equals 17. The source that he liked to bring was that when Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, went to find a wife for Isaac, he went 10 days in one leap. 10 days distance he did in one day. And so when he comes to the wellspring, to the well in the city of Haran, and actually you can see it on Google Earth exactly where it is, Really, you go to Haran, where Haran is today in Turkey, and you'll see a place that's called Isaac's Well. And that, by tradition, was the well that Eliezer came to. In any case, it's just nice to know. Nice fact. When he came there, he said, Va'avo hayom el ha'ain. I came today to the well. Now the initials of those 4 words are the same initials, but in a different order. Va'avo is Vav. Hayom is Hey. El is Aleph. Ha'ain is another Hey. So we have Vav, Aleph, Vav, Hey, Aleph, Hey. Va'avo hayom el ain. That's also equal to 17. So this was a very interesting thing that in Chassidus they loved this. And it became like a staple to tell stories about the Baal Shem Tov skipping from one place to the other suddenly. And he'd get on the wagon, and the Lexi would turn around, and the horses would glide through the air, and you could probably find the picture somewhere here that Nachshon made, or what's the other guy? The guy in Gansberg. No, what's his name? We once looked for that picture, right? There's a very famous picture that you see him flying through the air like Santa Claus.
The carriage, right?
Yeah.
I heard a lot of stories about it.
But that's not what he meant. That's the fairy tale side of it. The real side of it, and that's really what happened in all these stories, is today I came to the well also means something else. Ain, what does ain mean? Ain means 3 things in Hebrew. It means a well. It means a color. You mentioned before that you saw a rainbow. Einaim are this is because we have color, and it also means an eye. I came today to the eye. What does it mean I came today to the eye? This name opens your eyes. That's what he meant to say. I came today to see. I suddenly see. What do I see? I see the divine providence. How do you see the divine providence? We're blind, we don't see. It says, when you begin to pray for other people, when the cells, the stars that you meet during the day, they become a galaxy in your davening, you begin to see things you couldn't see before. You begin to see how Hashem is guiding your life. This is tried and tested. Any person that's done this begins to understand what God wants from him. Why? Because he's done something. Again, this is on the surface, really on the surface. We could study this. We could have a seminar now, 3 weeks on the 5 lines that we read. I'm not exaggerating. It's so deep what he says here, but I'm just saying the surface of it. The surface is a simple idea that the moment that you bring into your words, into your prayer, you bring everything that you met. When you come out of it, when you emerge, even while you're in the prayer, you begin to understand things that you could not understand any other way, because what you're doing is you're bringing the stars together to form a galaxy, uncovering a new dimension. In the same way that the letters create meaning. So it's not just the letters that you're reading in the Siddur. It's the letters that you're bringing from your experience in life. And that opens up a new dimension of divinity. You begin to see divinity. Now, I can't see divinity, I can't see godliness, but I begin to see why these 30 trillion stars have a soul that is guiding them in the same way that my body is guided in some way. It's not just a potpourri of cells that somehow are clinging to one another. They actually have a purpose, they have a goal, they're doing something. And you begin to see that level. I said I would say something about davening. Rav Steinsaltz, my teacher who passed away 2 years ago, he was very fond of this story. He said he was a great philologist. I don't know if that's how you say it in English. In Hebrew, you say philolog, but I guess it's the same word, right? Philologist? I don't know how you would say it. Anyway, it's a man who studies words. So, he says he searched high and low for the meaning of this word davening. In what language is it? It's not in Yiddish, it's not in Hebrew.
Dovnik. It comes from Dovnik.
It's not in Persian.
Divine. Divine, maybe?
It's not in English. He says he searched and he searched and he searched. He couldn't come up with what the etymology of this word was until he heard the story. And the story is like this. So you're right, in the Ukraine. The story happens in the Ukraine. There's a Jew who is working for some landlord. And the landlord says, look, I'm sick and tired of you. Unless you can entertain me, you have to get off my land. So the Jew says, what can I possibly do to entertain you? So he says, you know what? I have this bear that we just captured, the baby bear. Take it and teach it to pray. Have you ever heard this story? So what can he do? He takes the baby bear home and he racks his head and he thinks about it. And after a while he comes up with an idea. So he takes a few blocks of wood and he cuts holes and he takes rope and he makes it into a really big book, like made out of wood, like a few slabs of it, like 2-3 pages. And then he puts honey inside. And then on all the levels of the slabs of wood. Then he brings the bear to the landlord, and he says, "I taught him to pray." He says, "Really?" He didn't think he could. So he says, "Here, watch." So he's holding the bear, and the bear smells the honey. You know what I mean? Puts the slab, finishes one, turns it over, does the next one. So the landlord's looking, he says, "What, are you crazy? He's not praying, he's eating, he's muttering, he's eating." He says, "What do you think we do?" And he said, then he figured out the meaning of the word davening. Davening means, it's a convolution of the word in Hebrew, which means to turn pages. Ledafdif. He says that's the closest possible etymology you can come to this word. It literally means to turn pages. That's what davening is. It was one of his favorite stories. I must have heard it like 10 times from him. But it's a great story. Apparently it's true also. That's what the word means. So what is the Baal Shem Tov saying? He's saying you can't let it stop there. Why do we just turn pages? Because we don't understand. We don't understand. Okay, so now we have a translation. We got to sit with a translation. But the Baal Shem Tov says it's not just about that. It's not just about understanding the words. The problem is that the prayer is an arc. It's something that you have to bring the rest of your life into. You have to bring everything that you've encountered, all the stars, all the pieces that you've encountered of your life, you have to bring it in order to uncover the divinity that's in the world. And that's how it works. So God willing, we'll get a chance maybe next time that I come to go much, much deeper into this. And for now, I hope that we have a message for the coming holidays, but for all year long. And we can start with this Ma'ariv. And it's okay that while you're praying, you bring the rest of your life into it. And when you begin to pray for the rest of the pieces of your life, you pray for them. It's not just that you mention them, I mean, you really pray for them. You begin to see the meaning behind what's happening in your life. You begin to understand things that are simply impossible to see and understand without this process.
Is that available to take questions?
Yes?
Anybody?
Especially about wonders, if somebody wants to ask. Yeah.
Okay. Talking about the parashat, the Noah. Did the Noah actually ask God for punish the people? He never
No,
do that.
no. He didn't ask him to punish them, and he never asked him to forgive them. Neither.
There's a closer sense now as to what that original secret was that the Baal Shem Tov couldn't go over?
So if we would have time to go over everything, we'd know exactly. He encoded within these words everything that he meant to say. Everything.
Just these words or the whole letter?
You don't need the whole letter, just this one paragraph.
Just that one paragraph.
No, but what I'm doing this week is I got almost 20 different books from the library all about Judaism. Just for this. It's amazing. You know, like as you say, the word is over there, but the meaning behind it. What are those sentences? What are representing? Or how we can make a connection with the Kodesh Baruch through. That's the important part.
And then,
Shema Israel. But how big is the word itself? It's not just Shema, listen to me. No, we're talking about something very big. Go ahead, let's say.
The Rabbi Ginsburg gave a lecture about the incense and Ashan, the holy smoke.
Olam Shana Nefesh, yeah.
Is that connected with?
It's close, but it's not. Lashon is Lamed Shinun, and Ashan is Ayin Shinun. But it's, again, it's one word in the description of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, from which there's a whole cosmology that comes out of just one word, Ashan. And that was the cosmology that was taught in Torah until the time of the Arizal. The Ari, he began to speak about another level above Olam Shana Nefesh, above the psyche, just the psyche. And then when the Baal Shem Tov came, he took the same idea of Olam Shana Nefesh and he turned it into Olamot, Neshamot, Elokut, world, souls, and divinity. So he took that level that the Ari began to speak about and he made it explicit. So the Ashan is just the first two levels, really. Ashan is just the worlds and souls, because you have the Ashan is, again, worlds and time and souls. And so he condensed that into two, just the worlds and souls. And then he added the divinity. But that needs a lot of discussion to explain. The part of the depth of what's going on here is how to explain all the previous cosmologies, how they fit into the Baal Shem Tov's new approach.
Oh, can you see one more?
Let me want to ask you a question.
It's in Hebrew, but it means ledafdef. Ledafdef means to turn pages. Of what? Can. So, for instance, I have a friend who has cancer, advanced stage cancer in Florida, and he doesn't want to. He took one course of chemotherapy. He doesn't want to take any more. And he said anybody who's taking chemotherapy understands him, and he's trying all these alternative things. And I've been davening for him for a long time. And just when it came down to Florida earlier this week, was it this week? No, it was last week. I don't even know where I am. Somebody came to me and we began to speak, and he doesn't have any illness or anything, but he told me that there's this special type of cannabis extract, whatever, that's very hard to get, and it's so good that if you would take it with chemotherapy, then you wouldn't feel the chemotherapy at all. And so, at first I didn't connect it. I couldn't see like when he told me, I didn't get the connection. And then I davened that evening, my friend also, and suddenly the connection came to my mind. And I said, well, if I have to tell him. 20 minutes later, he was there without me calling him or anything.
So if you get good ideas in the middle of davening, does that mean it's a good idea? Or is it
I think he hasn't agreed yet, but he started reconsidering. It was the first time in 6 months that he's willing to reconsider going back to chemotherapy.
I'm just saying,
It's not just a good idea. It's like you suddenly see things that.
Saying somebody else has the thoughts.
Okay, these thoughts, you need to pursue them. You need to do something with them. It's like, again, it's these connections. It should have been obvious to me, but it wasn't. I was tired. I couldn't see it. But then suddenly, when I davened for him, suddenly I remembered this conversation, and it came together. But then the interesting thing was that he suddenly showed up right away, and like I told him about it right away, and he talked to this guy, and so maybe something will come out of it. I don't know.
So was there that one, or was it coming together with others? Or both?
It's both. It's both. But it's also about my life, all kinds of things that suddenly become apparent to me. There was something really strange. I mean, I don't know how this is going to sound. But when I was down in Florida, I met people, a group of people that are like the mirror image of my life. But I didn't realize that until I davened afterwards. What do I mean? That my parents came to America in the 70s, and then we moved back to Israel. And their parents came to America in the 70s, but they stayed here. Now the strange thing that happened was, I went back to Israel, and then I met Rav Ginsburg, and I worked for him, and so on. And they stayed here, and they were not from, we were from when we came, and then we went back. And they came, they weren't from, and they became from. And then somebody brought Rav Ginsburg to them somehow. And 30 years later, I'm meeting the same, like the people that I would have been in some way just like them. But here I am bringing them what they were looking for all the time. It was very, I couldn't understand this until I davened. And when I began to know, I began to feel, wait a minute, this in a certain sense is like closing a loop in my life. Like a certain circle has found meaning, something that I didn't understand until now. Again, it's very personal, so I'm not sure that you're getting what I'm saying, but it was like a feeling of, wow, this is divinely ordained. This is something that's happening, it has meaning. Right, that I couldn't see. Yeah.
Prayer is bringing divinity into your life.
It's opening me to see divinity.
Bring your life into your prayer.
Right.
That's what you are
Right.
How do you intentionally pour your life into your prayer?
It's like the Lubavitcher Rebbe used to say, anybody who asked him anything, he would say, Azkir al Tziyun. I'll mention it when I go the next time to my father-in-law's gravesite. And what did he do there? He prayed. And then he got the answers.
Praying for others.
Right? It's praying for others.
Praying for others.
Right? My role in the world is to bring things together. Every one of us, not just I'm just a placeholder. I'm like anyone else. Our role is to stand between the worlds and between divinity, and to bring the worlds together, and then we discover divinity. That's what the role of a soul is. In the same way that what was my soul doing with my body? It's taking 30 trillion cells, apparently. It's bringing them together, and then I can do something. These 30 trillion cells, they couldn't do anything if the soul wasn't there. They'd be a collection. They wouldn't know where they were going.
So with this exercise, the souls can come together not just with prayer, but other ways.
Of course, that's what we started with. Said that even if a husband and wife merit, so they see the divine providence in their life all the time. Yes?
Does the Rav have any suggestions or advice for women praying?
It's the same thing. Why is it?
Pray alone?
It's all the same. Well,
You don't have to be a dominion. So, I find that like a lot of times I get distracted in shul. Even if there isn't talking, usually there is, but even if there isn't talking, it's harder for me to really go internal and really go into that like deep place because I'm just so self-conscious that people are seeing me.
right.
And so I don't go really deep in prayer. But then at home I get distracted.
So do it at home. At the same time, it says that when you daven at the same time, in Chabad in general, there's a saying from the Friediger Rebbe, from the previous Rebbe, that if you can't daven in a minyan, you can daven by yourself with all 10 faculties of yourself. What it means is that you put your entire being into it, and then it's like you're with a minyan. And for women, I think that's very appropriate. But by the way, it doesn't have to be the text that's in the Siddur. a time that women do this for sure is when lighting candles. But it can be any time. Prayer doesn't have to be specifically when there's a minyan. I just mentioned before that when 10 Jews come together, the divine is there anyway. But here we're saying that even when I'm alone, this could be. It doesn't have to be something that's necessarily with other people.
I'm wondering for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, like if it's better to be in shul or if it's better to be home.
Depends if you can. The only thing you need is shofar, and somebody can come blow, or you can. You don't have to necessarily go to shul for. But again, it all depends on if you can or you can't. If you find that you can pray better at home, so there's a lot of reasons to say that certainly a woman doesn't have an obligation to be in shul.
What about the Torah reading?
Yeah, if they're here.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
What were the 33 meanings of ayin?
Yeah,
Eye,
right.
color,
And well.
and a spring.
Right, a wellspring.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so by davening, what you mean is not tefillah necessarily, but kind of like conversation.
Okay, so what does the word tefillah mean? We didn't mention this. The word tefillah is also a very difficult word to understand. But the general agreement is tefillah comes from the word tofel klei cheres. The Mishnah in Taharot, it says that tofel klei cheres. Tofel means to fuse together. The very meaning of tefillah, of prayer, is to put things together. It's exactly what the Baal Shem Tov is saying here. It also makes sense because what prayer is doing is it's putting words together to talk to Hashem, to create a higher dimension. But it literally means that, to fuse things together. There was one of the women wanted to, yeah.
So you mentioned in Rashid, when the letters are lined up, there's a meaning above them.
Right.
In a sense, what Baal Shem Tov may be saying, I'm asking, is that meaning something that we bring in? The letters can have many meanings.
Right.
They can have many different combinations. So when God created the world in Bereshit, He created the meaning above it, and those words became created, and the world was created. So in a sense, we're saying, put the meaning above the prayer to create this ethereal, extra physical thing that needs to happen in your life. Is that what you're saying?
That's one option. The other option is that you're creating the meaning. Meaning that Hashem is big enough to contain everything. And one of the reasons that theoretically he could just run everything by himself. What does he need me for in the middle? Because he's saying, I created you as someone who has free will, and free will is not just to act. The greatest free will that we have, the real free will that we have, is to think. And so when I think, I give a new twist on everything. I give a new interpretation of everything. One that only I can give. No one else who sees these things will have my interpretation. And so that particular meaning that I'm bringing about, Hashem is now happy to have. He says, I waited for this since I created the world. I was waiting for someone to understand it this way. And that's exactly how the Torah develops. That every time that someone applies themselves seriously to Torah, they come up with new understanding. And so Torah grows. It's called the Yagdil Torah v'Yadil. The Torah becomes greater and greater. Because Torah is the discussion, the discourse between us and Hashem. So when I apply myself to it, I find new things, and that becomes part of what Hashem meant. So did he mean it? In a certain sense, yes, but in a certain sense, no. So meaning he was waiting to mean it when I would think it. And then he said, oh, that's what I meant. There's a whole discussion about what it means that we are partners in creating the world. So obviously we're not creating the world, you and I, because, I don't know, I don't understand exactly how that's done. but we are partners in creating meaning. And that meaning is like bringing out what God wanted to say all along. But I'm the part of Him that brings it out, that says it. I'm the dynamic part of God that is able to voice it, to make it actually manifest in reality. So in that sense, it's new. But it's exactly what the sages say, that anything that is going to be innovated by a true scholar was already taught to Moshe at Sinai. So if it's an innovation, how could Moshe have been taught it? And if he was taught it, why is it an innovation? It's trying to capture this very complex situation where, on the one hand, it was said, but it was never spoken in some way. Maybe the best example of this, this is an explanation that's brought in Chassidus, is that before God created the world, He asked the souls of the Jewish people whether He should create it or not. So the usual explanation is that it's very nice of Him to ask us. But the deep meaning is that He needed to have partners in order to do it. Meaning, it's sort of like you want to do something, but you need someone to come and tell you, this is really what you want to do. He knew what He wanted to do, but He couldn't say it. He was waiting for us to say it for Him. It's like that when we would say, you want the world, you should make it. That gave Him the ability to do it. He needed to have a partner. Like someone to confide in, someone that's with Him. I hope it captures some of it.
So the ultimate purpose of the Tzaddikim, prime example of whom is the Baal Shem Tov, is to ultimately come to perceive divine providence through putting together words.
Right. Tzaddikim do it by bringing souls together. The tzaddikim, why do they have an oilim, we call it? It's a very interesting word. Oilim in Yiddish means a kahal. It means a congregation. But the word itself sounds like the Hebrew olam. It comes from that word. It's really the word olam, which means world. So they have an oilim. That's how they call it in Yiddish. And what does it mean? It means that they bring people together. And the moment that they bring people together, then they begin to have the ability to show divinity. But they need to show it.
Could the Rav briefly talk about the topic of tomorrow and the after tomorrow?
What's the topic tomorrow? Tomorrow it's going to be about the Lubavitcher Rebbe and the Baal Shem Tov. And it'll be about how the Lubavitcher Rebbe describes the Baal Shem Tov. He describes it a little bit differently than what we did today.
So let me just.
So yes, hold on a second. You have to speak louder. Sorry. In Kabbalah, we have 4 different reasons for why God created the world. Different discussions have a different reason. The highest reason is what we call that nitava kadosh baruch hu la'asot lo dira b'tachtonim, that He has a craving to dwell below, meaning He has a craving to dwell in our mundane world. What does it mean? How does He crave? How does He dwell in our mundane world? Through us. Then there's an explanation that's brought in the Zohar, which says "Begin dishmaduan le," which means so that He will become known. He wanted the world so that He could become known. And then there's a reason that says, as was quoted a lot by the Ramchal, and he writes, Teva tov leitiv, that the nature of good is to do good. That what He tried to do is to reveal His goodness. And if He has no one to give His goodness to, then he's not able to manifest it. So he needed to create a world which he could be a beneficiary of, benefactor of. And the final reason this is brought in the Midrash Tanchuma in Parashat Naso, and it says there, Ein melech belo am, that he wanted to be king. And you can't be a king if you don't have a people. What does it mean, a people? So it says you can't be a king over ants. You have to be a king over someone who is just close enough to you that it means something to be his king. So that's why he had to make us with free will to be like him, to be as creative as he is, to have that freedom to create, which is his freedom. So those four different explanations, they correspond to the four letters of God's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei. And this in and of itself is a very big discussion. But those are the four reasons that are brought for why God created the world. In the end, what you see about all of them is that it's as if he's not complete until he has a world. And that's a very difficult concept to understand. The whole, one might say, the turning point of Kabbalistic thought happened when in the 11th century there was a Kabbalist who wrote that if you take away the incompleteness from God, you have made him incomplete. It's a very deep paradox. That if you say God has to be perfect, then he does not contain incompleteness. There's something outside of him. So you have to, because we can understand that. We understand what incompleteness means. We understand what it means not to be whole. So if we can understand it, he certainly can understand it. So if he can understand it, he is it. Because what he knows is what he is. By him, knowledge and being are the same thing. So if he understands incompleteness, he himself is also incomplete. So another way of saying everything that we just said is that the world that was created is a manifestation of God's incompleteness. Say it another way, we are the incomplete aspect of God. We're godly, but we're not the perfect aspect of God, we are the incomplete aspect of God. What?
That's a hard one.
Because it says your thoughts are not mine, like my thoughts.
Exactly.
So he created.
But they have to,
Doesn't mean he's
100%, but they have to be at least our thoughts. He's much more than that, but he certainly contains my thought. If I can think of something, he can think of it too. So he's at least my thought. To say that he's not doesn't mean that he doesn't think like me. No, it says that my thoughts are not your thoughts, meaning I have thoughts that you can't even begin to understand. But certainly he understands the thoughts that I have. Okay? At least that's true. Okay. Okay.
That's an extremely deep idea.
So Rabbi, the fact that we are the incomplete aspect of God means there's no error in the system. That's by design that he created this incompleteness so that we work on bringing godliness and rectification.
It's to join the two parts together, as it were. That the completeness should be joined with the incompleteness. That's what makes it whole.
Right.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned
Sorry.
that the Baal Shem Tov's message took hold in the United States.
Sorry?
You had said that Baal Shem Tov's message took hold in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
United
yeah,
States
yeah.
more so than anywhere else in
Right.
the world.
Because the Rebbe was here.
Because he was here.
Right.
Has it taken hold in Israel?
No, not yet. It's slowly taking over, but it's not. It didn't have the same effect. There's a lot of social reasons for it. Why it hasn't had the same effect. But you have to remember that here in America, Yiddishkeit was facing a whole different set of problems than it's facing in Israel. And so
World
the
War.
Rebbe applied himself, first of all, to the United States. Secondarily, I think, to Europe and to other places outside of the land of Israel. And in the land of Israel, his main concern was just, or mostly, again, the main concern was the security, was to ensure that they didn't make terrible mistakes that would cost lives. And you see that the moment that they made those mistakes, that was exactly what happened.
So there's no one in the land of Israel who brings souls together?
Of course there is.
People together?
There are many people who do, but it's not as far-reaching that like, again, find me a Persian community in Israel that has Tilat Hashem on the wall, that has pictures of the Rebbe. That you won't find that.
Global phenomenon.
In America, it's almost natural, but in Israel, it's not, because if you're Persian, so you have your nusach, you have something completely different. It's as if you don't need it, because it's a different set of problems. Yeah.
I want to ask a challenging question. I don't know if it's challenging. It's challenging for me. The story of Noah, as described by Baal Shem Tov, is that a cautionary tale of what happens when you don't bring souls together, instead build an ark?
The sages said this already. He didn't say it.
So did Noah create the flood?
No. But he didn't do what he could to prevent it. He's not to blame for it.
Prevented the flood by
He
doing-
could have prevented theoretically by praying for. Good.
Is that something we should try historically to avoid as a people?
Of course, because that's exactly where Abraham starts. Abraham starts where Noah finishes. The Noah, all he could do was save himself. That has a lot to do with the difference here between worlds and souls. Again, Noah sees just worlds. He sees worlds apart, or colliding maybe, but he can't see the souls that come out of it. He doesn't see that level. Avraham starts from seeing the souls. He begins to see why things have to come together. That's the whole premise of the Jewish people. I'll say it in short, that every single religion and system in the world only sees worlds. It doesn't see souls. Now, we haven't begun to really get into what souls means, but souls means to rectify the reality. Worlds means to elevate reality. Those are two different things. Like in two sentences, to rectify reality means to separate good from evil. To elevate doesn't require a separation between good and evil. You can leave it the way it is, just bring it up. Like we see, the world progresses all the time. It's everything, all the systems in the world have caused the world to progress. But that didn't make it into a better world. It made it a more advanced world. Technology, science, whatever, even religion, what it made is a higher world. It's evolved. But it hasn't necessarily become better. It hasn't become morally better. For that, you need Torah. Torah is how you separate good from evil. It's a whole different story. It's a different approach. I don't know. The pasuk says, "Kol ele yifal kel pa'amayim shalosh im gaver." It's a pasuk in Iyov, and from that the Arizal starts that you can come back 3 times. 3 times, but there's he himself writes of gilgulim that are 20 times. So it's. So I guess you have to be the Arizal to know these things.
Moshe is 3 times.
He's much more. He's after Moshe Shet Hevel. After that, he becomes Yirmiyahu, a Navi, Ezra. He has many. Yeah. What do you mean, read more? So unfortunately, these are classes by Rav Ginsburg that are still in Hebrew. We haven't. Yeah, they're on the Hebrew repository. You can find them under Olamot Neshomot Elokut. It's a whole series. No. It's from ancient times. It's just audio. Yes?
One of the clearly as I have tonight. Thank you for that, like, it was amazing.
I have to
You know-
double that.
What?
Myself included.
And, you know, I'm hearing, I'm a photographer, so I capture life, and then sometimes I have the time to go back and to look and to see. And I think when you're talking, just from hearing other people's comments, I'm not just gonna share my experience, is that as we go through our day, and there's this unification happening, and you express how it brings Kashkat Pratik, like we're able to look and see the providence of things if we're quiet enough, and we do the recollection of everything that happened during the day, and we bring these worlds of moments together. And I'll give you an example that happened. About 6 years ago, I was filming a musician in her studio, and she was talking about a song that she had just written about a young girl who suddenly got cancer, and unfortunately it took her like that. And the man she was singing at the time was in the studio, and she was very emotional, talking about how this affected her, and she was very much in love with this man at that time in the studio. And she was very emotional. He co-wrote it. She didn't quite understand how that could happen, and it moved her. And during COVID, they separated, and overnight, this man who she had seen, in two weeks he was gone with cancer. And I looked at this footage. I mean, I didn't remember in the moment, but I looked at this footage, and I went, oh my goodness, like so many times in life, these signs are really here for us. We can actually see this language of worlds interacting a lot in hindsight, and it's quite remarkable, and it's almost as if we're living. If we can remember to go to the past, and let's just like, this is our prayer. How we move through life, how we speak in that moment. This is our prayer.
That's what you're saying is what the sages said, that would it be that a person would pray all day long? And then he would be able to really integrate everything and see the soul of the world.
And how do you
Could I
do
turn
that?
her story that she shared into a question?
Sure.
So prayer is one way to prevent or to open up in order, that's just a question, not a comment.
Yeah.
In order to not miss what she said she missed. Does our
Acknowledgement and gratitude. For example, I had a meeting, then I won't say anymore. I had a meeting last week, and I was with a young musician. And he called me on Sundays. He wasn't feeling well, he felt really tired, and I know that he has a history of Crohn's. And I said, have you been bleeding? And he said, yes. I said, you have to go to the hospital, right? The only reason I was talking to him was because we had this meeting. Otherwise, he's off. He's like, you know, they're very organic, they're hard to pin down. So we were connecting because of this meeting. And his mother called me the next day. He did get into the hospital, and she said, you basically saved his life. So I'm sitting here at the beginning listening to you, and I'm thinking, the meeting that we had with this lawyer this week was what saved his life. Because had we not had the meeting, maybe he would have been talking to someone he would have listened to urge him into the hospital.
And then like you said, the acknowledgement.
And so for me, it's gratitude.
Right.
I acknowledge Hashem.
Mm-hmm.
I thank Hashem that he was able to use me this way.
Mm-hmm. I guess you answered.
and that's definitely one huge part of the answer. The other part that probably from personal experience is the way our ego stands
Oh, of course.
in our way. If I'm only thinking about how I'm looking to the world around me.
Well, I only look at one world, mine.
Right. It's a huge like a block.
by the way, when I treat myself just as a world that needs to be preserved, I'm missing my soul. Okay, my soul comes out when I begin to bring worlds together. Meaning I don't really know what my soul is until I do that. Yeah.
The comment about Hashem's incompliteness, I always had that question. And the way that I kind of applied what I learned from Rabbi Friedman, Manus Friedman, was that Hashem's incompleteness is, in a way, he has a God completeness even in his incompleteness.
Yeah, sure.
So this is different than the incompleteness that I, as a human being.
Right. That's basically what Mordechai was trying to say, but I didn't let him.
His incompleteness is very complete.
Right. That's a very important statement. Yes.
Forgive me, this might be a pretty surface level question, but
A what kind
sort of surface level question. We're discussing how there are three different sort of layers to understanding the text, like the letters themselves, the words, and then some deeper meaning.
Right.
I feel like a lot of the times, at least that I can recall, when discussing Jewish texts, the deeper meaning seems to be almost in contradiction to the words themselves. And I suppose my question is, like in the example that you gave with the Baal Shem Tov's interpretation of Noah's Ark,
right.
and how the Ark is actually a conscious, or should be prayer, it's not physical Ark.
Right.
From what I can remember, and I checked again on the text, like it sounds a lot like a physical Ark. How do you make the jump?
Because, like we said, that Hashem lets me go in the direction I want to go. There's a big principle that He didn't create me in order to block me. He created me with free will, and then He plays along. And so, however I interpret it, that's the way it's going to be.
So is any interpretation valid?
Well, it's not valid. It's a question of whether it's going to be beneficial or not. And of course it's valid, but what he interpreted was very limited. He could have done so much more. That's how all of life is. I can interpret my circumstances in one way and achieve one thing, and I can maybe interpret them in a completely different way and achieve 1,000,000 times more.
I feel like, and forgive me, I have conversations with my dad about this, and I ask him questions like this, and he feels like I'm getting confrontational. I promise I'm not trying to get
It's not confrontational. It's wonderful.
I feel like making a leap like this one that I suppose in the example that we're talking about, from a text that I think pretty clearly describes a physical arc to something that is completely different. I feel like if that is technically allowed, then all sorts of leaps are totally
Of course.
possible.
Of course.
There's a lot
They
of
have to be made.
worlds.
They have to be made. Not just possible. They have to be made. In this case, what he's saying is very strong because, again, the sages say this. It's not his idea. He just showed it in the words. Right? The sages said that Noach didn't do what he was supposed to do. Why didn't he do it? Because he should have prayed. And they say he should have prayed. But nobody noticed, or maybe they noticed. It could be that he's just reconstructing what the sages meant anyway. I don't know. But it could be that they base themselves on the similarity between, or the two meanings of the word teva. And that's how they understood it, that he should have prayed. That's what God was asking him to. Supposedly they contrasted with Abraham, so they always go in that direction, that he prayed for the people of Sodom. But Baal Shem Tov is just saying what was said anyway. He's not making such a great leap. And what I want to impress on you is that even prophecy needs interpretation. Even when you're being talked to directly by God, it depends how you understand it. You can hear the most limited version of what God is saying. And what I'm trying to say is that every one of us is hearing God through our lives. And we can either interpret it as, like the Rebbe wanted us to interpret it, as widely as possible, and as far-reaching as possible, and as responsible as possible, and as capable as far as we are capable. Or we can hear it very limited. The whole purpose of life is just for me to take care of myself. Those are two possible interpretations of every person's life.
I mean, I feel like if we're shooting for the widest possible understanding of an interpretation, like, okay, why can't arc mean like an arch?
Well, if you can show that that's what it means in Hebrew, then all the more power to you. There are rules of Hebrew. You have to know what was said until now.
As someone who doesn't speak Hebrew,
right, said it.
Moses began.
But that's a good reason to speak Hebrew, and it's a good reason. Again, the sages are very, very. I talk about this a lot. Why is the Talmud the most important book in Judaism? The Tanakh is not the most important book. There's two different explanations. One explanation says Tanakh is what God said to us. Talmud is what we said back. Okay? It's what we responded. So for us, it's more important how we responded than what he said. But the real reason that the Talmud is more important than the Tanakh in many ways is because in the Tanakh there's no contradictory opinions, or you're very hard pressed to find them. And the Tanakh is not an inclusive text. But the Talmud is a snapshot, albeit of 500 years of discussion, but they work really hard to bring everybody in. I mean, it works as hard as it can. Some opinions are like, a real long shot, and the Talmud brings it in. As long as it can still bring it in. If it's something that doesn't have any basis, so it can't. But even the most contradictory opinions, they come in together. Why? Because that is the basis of life. That you have to have different approaches. You have to have different opinions. God is multifaceted, so we're multifaceted as people. And the Torah is multifaceted. So all these things have to come together. And the Talmud is the only book in the history of the world that's been able to do something like that. And believe me, the arguments are tough. I mean, they called you... I just saw this week, somebody put together a dictionary of all the derogatory terms used in the Talmud that the sages call one another. But they fight because they want to be under the same roof. This is a saying that the Alter Rebbe writes an interesting halacha. He says that 10 people can use one talis. How can 10 people use one talis? They can say one bracha and 10 people can use one talis. How can 10 people fit under one talis? So in Chabad there's a saying that says, if 10 people are arguing over who's going to use the talis, then 10 people, you can't even get 2 under a talis. But if 10 people are trying to get 10 people under a talis, then you can fit 10 under. And if everybody's pulling the others, you can get them in. Okay? It depends on what I'm looking at. The Talmud is it's a harsh book. It's full of very, very harsh words. And the arguments are very harsh. But in the end, you feel that the arguments are being conducted in order to bring everything into consideration. That every single opinion should be clarified completely. So nothing should be left out. That's what Yiddishkeit is really about. So I hope that makes an impression that you should read Rav Steinsaltz's Talmud, and you'll see that. He loves to point it out also. Yeah.
But isn't also what he's saying? Isn't also what he's saying a part of our evolution? This is the first.
Yes, because in the Tanakh it wasn't like that. It took time to figure it out. That's what I said. That was what God was saying.
It's total evolution. You're consistently expanding.
Rav Steinsaltz used to say that our problem in Israel is very simple. That they decided that all the children should learn something in Torah. So what did they decide they should learn? Tanakh. So what did children think? That the Jewish ideal is to be a prophet. Right? He says if they would have decided that everybody needs to learn Talmud, then people would have understood that the Jewish ideal is to be a scholar. What's the difference? A prophet says something, he doesn't care what anyone says. He lives alone in his world. A scholar lives with other people. He's in dialogue. That's the whole problem. He says we have 5 million prophets running around. Everybody knows everything. Everybody knows the right way to do things. And nobody knows how to talk to one another. That's how we used to describe the situation. Yes? Oh, right, right.
Maybe everyone was supposed to build an ark,
right.
And everyone was going to save, and their people, their family, their animals. So it's not like necessarily excluding. Like we can't really know whether it was.
That's very correct.
He
He should have built the ark and prayed.
Yeah.
So somebody wrote to me here. I don't know who says that. Since we now understand that we need to pray for Chaim Michael ben Kiratza. Yeah. Refuah Shlema. I said it's been wonderful. I hope to see you tomorrow.